Well, I was, you know, the thing about it was a very different sort of school. We had this head who had been trained in Britain. She'd done those old-fashioned A-levels. And then she'd done 2 years in a teacher's training college. And those old training colleges in the 50s were very, very good. And we had a whole class of teachers who, that was their education. And they were, I suppose, very sensible and very kind of proper in a way. But they had a humane training. They read a great deal. And their skill as teachers was phenomenal. And, you know, and I hadn't been properly trained as a primary school teacher at all. I'd managed to acquire a diploma in education from at Wits, just because it looked like you could lead a kind of dissipated life and teach for a while, and earn some money. So I did this diploma in education, and by sheer good luck I got this job at the school, and all these teachers had been really well trained, and I wasn't, well trained like them. But I'd had plenty of good reading. I had read the whole English canon, and Wits was a very brutal university. Training was hard. They just used to throw you in the deep end. The lecturers were all very clever scholars. They didn't like students. They actually positively hated students. But the result of that was you really learnt. They were disorganized. You eventually learned to organize yourself. And you learned to survive in the system. And students formed alliances, and it was great. I think in the end, you got a very, very thorough education. And I felt quite well equipped. But I was learning this new job, and I got trained. They were very kind to me. They trained me in the way, on the job, the way they'd been trained. And then after a long time, there was a new change in the system. We had people who had come out of the Faculty of Ed with MEds, and they tended to look down on our sort of class of teachers. They seemed to regard them as inferior or not properly educated. And that in a way annoyed me, because I felt I'd been properly educated, and I was not going to be intimidated by this MEd stuff. It just irritated me, and they often seemed quite shallow, and the bullying and that sort of idea that you shouldn't really be teaching, when they'd been teaching for years and years and years and had done it so successfully, and hell, they'd trained me, and that was kind of the thing that really annoyed me, and I felt we had to have some resistance. But we had a few teachers who were very, there was that guy who had been an industrial chemist, and he'd been an adventurer and all over. He was from Greece. He'd come to Canada and, slept under bridges, This Yugoslav guy had a very similar background. He'd been in construction, and he'd gone to UBC, and he'd done a couple of degrees. And we got together and decided, we've got to resist this kind of bullying. And the only way to do it was to form a union. So the one guy, Harry, he got hold of the BCTF, and they didn't want anything to do with us because we were a private school. So that was fine. But Harry then found the BCGEU, which was, they were really terrific. There were grain handlers and stevedores and boilermakers, and chatting to those guys, and meeting working guys in Canada after all this time, real working men, I found they read a lot, that they were interested in their own development as people, and they were superbly competent. They could build houses, they could do a lot of things in the real world that I couldn't do. And they just thought this was really fun, that we wanted to unionize the school, this cutesy little private school, but it would mean a lot of revenue for them. And so each week we used to meet in the back of the science room and talk about who's been signed on. But then we weren't getting anywhere, us guys, but we had this very talented musician who was an artist. He could take the school orchestra and make it sound like the New York Philharmonic or something. He was brilliant. He could get the choir. He had about 3 choirs, and he worked very hard. He was passionate about his work, but he was temperamental. He was a real artist, though. And they never gave him any leeway. It was all You know, he had a kind of fit in with a sort of bureaucratic mindset, and it drove him nuts. And when he was antagonized, everything changed. He got together with us and he energized everybody. He was a great leader, and he was a very good, I mean, people respected him. They knew how good he was. And the result was, we pretty soon had a lot of cards signed. And at around that time then, and it was funny because I insisted on, I wanted the school to have academic freedom. I wanted debate in staff meetings, and I didn't want to just accept what comes out of the Faculty of Ed. And I'm afraid I've developed a real antagonism to this, what I think is this great faculty worldwide, which trains people outside of their disciplines, but does it by a kind of mechanistic formula. So you find English, which is a vital subject, gets absolutely, is one of the worst taught subjects, particularly at primary school. And you get things like the 6 traits of writing movement. I think it's appalling. It does things upside down. It's the wrong way around. You know, children should be writing stories. You should be telling stories to children. They should be telling stories and reading stories. Instead, what they do, they get trained in expository writing, for instance, which is suitable for 15 and 16-year-olds. But at 9-year-olds, it's a writer's block. And then they get forced to do these graphic organizers, which the teacher does, which is just a kind of crib. Whereas you want them to be spontaneous. You want them to keep a journal. You want to train children like, you want to say, how did Roald Dahl become a great writer? He wrote letters to his mother at boarding school. It was the only relief he had. How did Virginia Woolf become a great writer? Well, she kept a journal for herself, and she wrote letters, and she also, with her sisters, had started a newspaper in her own house, the Hyde Park Gate News. And if you read what Virginia Woolf could write at 11 years old, you see the training, and that she becomes a great novelist, and her work enters the English canon. It seems to me that's what you should be following if you want to teach people to write in English. Instead, we've got this mechanistic, formulaic way of doing it. And I want to debate with that kind of thing. I wanted to challenge it. But there's a certain authoritarianism that seems to come out of this Faculty of Education. And everybody does it this way, so we have to do it this way. And I wanted that to be challenged, and I wanted debate. And always in staff meetings, I would raise issues, you know. And the regime, as we called it in the end, I could see they hated my guts. And about the time that the union had just about been put together, I was to face some sort of disciplinary inquiry one Tuesday. And instead what happened was we delivered a notice of certification that the union would be certified. So it kind of saved my butt, because I think I would have been given a very rough ride and short shrift, and I may have even been slung out. But everything got blown away, and the boss had to cancel a trip to Australia, a ticket to Japan, and we went on holiday. And the whole summer the parent body was up in arms. They had meetings all summer, and we'd left this kind of, we had our summer holiday, and when we came back we had like this 9'6" guy with a ponytail who's going to negotiate for us, which they hated. You know, he had tattoos, right, ponytail, big guy, Mackinaw, and he was very experienced in union work in very pressured situations, and they had to go and hire this lawyer, you know, who he knew, and they knew the system, and they kept making mistakes, and between the two of them, you know, things started to work out. And the union was good because it did preserve academic freedom. And another thing we did, the only time we made pay an issue was the teachers who had that 2-year training. They were on a very low pay scale, and a couple of them were single mothers and so on. A lot of the teachers, we forego an increase in other categories to raise them a category, and I was really proud of that. That was good work, and it made things much, much happier. Once it was regulated, it became a much happier work environment.